Welcome to the first session of the NCC National Conference on the Defence of Australia, and I'm Patrick Byrne, President of the National City Council. Our first guest is Senator Jim Molan, a former Major General in the Australian Army. He was deployed for a year to serve as Chief of Operations for the Headquarters Multinational Force in Iraq, and has been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross as well as the Legion of Merit by the US government. He currently serves as a Liberal Senator in the Federal Parliament. So to begin our session today on the Defence of Australia, he is here to talk with us on the threats we face. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Pat. Very happy to do it, and I hope the conference goes well.
Thank you. Jim, to start off, Australia's had a wake-up call over the past 2 years with Beijing's punishment of a number of Australian industries, while Beijing has become increasingly belligerent in the region, as seen in the building of military bases on islands created in the South China Sea. Jim, what is the extent of both Beijing's economic threat and its military threat to Australia?
I think the threat is very, very large, Pat. I think it's in the first instance, it's not a threat that I assess which is directed directly against Australia. Yes, it is at the moment. There are certainly trade sanctions that are being applied by the Chinese Communist Party towards us, and threats have been made. By my counting, twice now we have been threatened, either by mouthpieces of the Chinese Communist Party or by officials, that if we keep doing what we're doing, we will be attacked either by conventional weapons or by nuclear weapons. But in my view, we are being picked on along those lines because we are a liberal democracy, because we are a friend of the United Nations, because we are a relatively a prosperous country, which of course trades with China. I don't think that China sees us as the great enemy. There are others who fit into that. So in my view, the threat is not so much against Australia any more than against anyone else. The real threat from China is against the United States, and we should then say, well, if China is fully or partially successful against the United States, what are the implications of that for us? And that's how we should look at the threat that faces us. Too often, I think, Pat, Australians think that in the first instance, a Chinese fleet will appear on the horizon, 500 ships will come and we'll be invaded. Okay, yeah, I suppose there's a probability of that happening. I think it's a very small probability. I think it is much more likely that the Chinese will take on the Americans in the Western Pacific, and then after booting the Americans out of the Western Pacific, they will then solve the Taiwanese problem. So I think that's the big question. We're not the centre of the known world. We will be collateral damage in a war between China and the United States, but that collateral damage could be enormous.
Jim, the federal government has ordered nuclear submarines, new advanced aircraft for the Air Force and new missiles. Are we doing enough to build an effective deterrent to a potential aggressor?
Well, this is where our ability to state to ourselves the nature of the next war is absolutely critical. So if, of course, we went through the process of determining a national security strategy, we would have to start off where your conference starts off. We would have to start off by saying that the threat is of such and such a type. It will involve such and such weapons, and it's likely to occur in such and such a time frame. If, of course, the threat is likely to occur in the time frame of 3 to 5 years, and I've been through a long process, Pat, where I have looked at the estimates made by everyone in the strategic commentary in industry. There's an enormous industry around the world, and the average time that people think that China must go to war with the United States or else they miss their chance is 3 to 5 years. Now, it might be 20 years, it might occur tomorrow morning. But the average from all the commentators is 3 to 5 years. I believe that's a fair average. Therefore, although I think that we should have nuclear submarines, I'm a bit concerned about the fact that we're not getting them for 10 or 20 years. I also see that the attempts were being made to build a sovereign capability for missiles, which we desperately need. And I praise the Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence every day of the week, and the Minister for Defence Industry every day of the week for doing this, but it's a 10 or a 20-year project. And what I keep saying to myself is, if there's a war going to occur in 3 to 5 years, what will the Australian Defence Force look like 3 to 5 years from now, given what we have, what the Liberal Party and the coalition government is doing?
Jim, do you think there's a priority need to purchase a large number of effective missiles, things that can be delivered within a short period of time, deployed here to bolster our defence?
Well, I don't know. I can give you my personal view on that. But the priority for anything that we do is to come up with a strategy. Perhaps if you've got 20 people in a room and you ask them what the priorities are, they'd all come up with a different answer. Prime Minister would, and we've seen what his priorities are, and it encompasses $270 billion worth of extra spending. But to say that the priority should go to missiles, well, what happens if missiles, what happens if the biggest challenge to us in the next couple of years is a destabilisation of the states to our north, which requires a counter-insurgency response from this nation to assist our neighbours? The question that I keep asking myself is, why would China offer us targets for missiles? And this is a key question. Why would China offer targets for missiles when it doesn't have to? Why would China not use, in the first instance, its extraordinary missile and rocket capability, which is considered to be the best in the world? The best in the world. Why would they not use that to force the Americans out? Then if we're happily down here, then they might do something towards us. But if we're happily down here buying missiles, yes, of course we've got to buy missiles. But let's not think of this as let's not think of a possible war between China and the United States as something like the last wars we've been fighting for 75 years. The wars I was involved in. That is, all of a sudden there's a few headlines. All of a sudden the Australian Defence Force deploys some forces to a far, far distant place. All of a sudden people in Australia, their lifestyle changes, not one jot. And at some stage, everyone comes back from the war. Hey, that's not going to be the war of the future. That's not the war we've got to prepare for. What we've got to prepare for is a war which is between the United States and China, and then Taiwan gets sorted out. And then we've got to ask ourselves, if China can force the United States out of the Western Pacific, what does this mean for Australia in the short to medium term? And it is disastrous, Pat.
Jim, given what you've said about the United States, it seems to say also it's not only a defence issue for us in terms of our military capability, but also our ability now to work with other nations in the region to get alliances together to form like a barrier there, a resistance there.
Yeah, absolutely. And diplomacy is our first line of defence. But diplomacy without a strong economy, a strong military, strong leadership, and strong strategy sitting behind it is just a polite conversation. So, look at what the foreign minister is doing at the moment. Brilliant work. She spent all this week where everyone in Australia would think that the only thing that was going on was the religious discrimination bill. Well, she met about six foreign ministers, international foreign ministers, regional foreign ministers. Today, she's down in Melbourne to meet with the Secretary of State from the United States, plus from India, Japan, and India, Japan, and Australia and the United States in the Quad. She's meeting with them. This is very important. But unless you have strength, having an alliance is totally pointless. So an alliance is only as good as the strength of the individual members. Look at NATO. NATO has been considered a joke for about the last 50 years because almost everyone in NATO doesn't even spend 2% on defence. So you know, NATO. What good is NATO if they are not focused on a single aim? If they don't have the capacity to back up their statements? So we can draw maps in our own mind with lines that might show nations that are part of an alliance up to the north, but it's not a barrier. It is not a barrier until we have a strong military backed by a strong economy, backed by a strong society, created by a strategy and led by strong leaders.
Well, do we basically have to do, as a starting point, commit to doubling our defence expenditure?
Who knows? Pat, it's the wrong way to approach this issue. The way to approach this issue is not to go for doubling of the defence vote. Maybe that's where we'll end up. But do you reckon you can sell that today? Where we've got to go today is to come up with a comprehensive and fearless national security strategy, which starts by government committing themselves to what is the nature of the threat. If government thinks that nothing is going to happen for 20 years, by then we'll have submarines. Well, we in the government should say it. That's a big, that's a big ask when we've got the foreign sector, the Secretary of State Blinken from the United States in Australia saying that China wants to dominate the world. So he said that yesterday. For us to come out and say we don't need to maximise the deterrent capability of the Defence Force for 20 years would be a very strange statement to make.
Jim, can I also ask, how should the priorities be also in defending ourselves internally, that is, defending our IT industries, our utilities, and ourselves from foreign influence? Again,
if we did a national security strategy, we would come up with the answer to that, Pat. We've already come up with a modern manufacturing policy, which I think is very, very good. We've got a program which encourages modern manufacturing in this country, and I think it's a good program. I don't think it puts enough emphasis on those Australian companies who might be less efficient than an American company, but they're Australian. They're based in Australia, they're run by Australians, they will always work for Australia. So all of those things have got to come together. So we've got to have, as I said before, we've got to have strong leadership, strong government, great intelligence, which we've pretty well got. We've then got to have strong society, strong military, strong industry, but we need to move quickly to that now. And the way to move quickly is to start with a strategy, because every question that you're asking me, the answer lies in the strategy. I can give you my personal answer. Yes, we need more of everything. This is what I say, Pat. I say that Australia lacks resilience as a nation, and it lacks self-reliance. I say that the Australian Defence Force lacks lethality. That is, it can't reach out and hurt people. It lacks sustainability. That is, it can't fight for long enough. And it doesn't have the mass that we're likely to need in what I consider to be the likely war that is to occur. So there's no point going back to a single thing. The consequences of that might be to double the defence expenditure. I don't know. This is a government which has done more for defence than any other government I can think of outside of wartime government. And the likes of Morrison and Payne and Dutton and everyone in the national security area, they are the best wartime leaders we could have, because they know their portfolios, and they know how to run portfolios. And this is the consequence of the election that's coming up at the moment. At a time like this, for anyone to consider going across to a Labor Greens government, and the Greens will not form government unless they force Labor to do some stupid things. And Anthony Albanese, of course, at the moment has said the most important thing in the relationship between Australia and the United States is net zero by 2050. Well, no, that's not the case at all. The most important thing for Australia at the moment is our survival as a liberal democracy.
Jim, you've named some of the key people who have got their heads around this, but has the extent of Australia's vulnerability and the extent of the threats to Australia sunk in more broadly in the political landscape and in the military and even culturally? I know we're talking in a few minutes' time with Jim Blackburn on this, but I'm interested in your views on how far the threat has sunk in beyond a few of the key people.
Well, in relation to the government, as I said before, this government has shown leadership. It's put money where its mouth is. It formed AUKUS. It's got a capable and competent foreign minister. Our defence industry, in my view, has never been as good as it is at the moment. We have the capability and are making things in this country in the defence environment that we've never made before. Now, my criticisms of the ADF and of the nation as a whole still stand. And the poor old PM, whenever I speak to him, and he says, "What more do you want me to do? $270 extra billion over 10 years." And it's a big ask of our society to put more money into defence. But my view is that if we sat down, and we're not going to carry our society until we have a perfect argument in relation to the kind of war that we should be preparing for. Now, I've knocked myself out over the last year, and I've written a book which HarperCollins will publish in due course, and that book is called Danger on Our Doorstep, and it addresses exactly this issue. What is the nature of the war that Australia may have to fight? How can you prepare this nation for the most uncertain times that we faced over the last 75 years if we're not prepared to predict in general terms the kind of war that we're going to fight? If we still think, Pat, that the next war involving China is going to involve us moving ships out of Sydney Harbour and sailing them up to join with a big American fleet up somewhere in the Senkakus or in the East or South China Sea or out in the first or second island chain, well, it'll all be over by the time they get to Sydney Harbour Heads. We have, and that's the first part of it. There's likely to be a frightening short period of time where the Chinese boot the Americans out of the Western Pacific, and the Americans admit that they cannot win a war against China in China's backyard. And Taiwan and the East and South China Seas and the first island chain are China's backyard. They have optimized themselves to destroy American forces in that area. Now, suppose they do it. And, at the moment, everyone, if I talk to people and you ask me how it's sinking in, if I talk to people about a Taiwan scenario, this is how they think of a Taiwan scenario. They think that the Chinese are going to line up their forces for the invasion of Taiwan in an eye-pleasing manner, down the Fujian province coast, and they're going to at some stage go from those locations across 180 kilometres of open sea, fight a big battle with the Taiwanese, and at the same time as being subjected to attacks by American aircraft and missiles, maybe from Guam, from Japan, from South Korea, from Diego Garcia, and maybe even from Darwin. Well, that's fantastic. But if the Chinese do that, then they will face another 100 years of colonialism. And they're not stupid. That would be the singularly most stupid activity when they have now the ability to destroy American power in Guam, Japan, South Korea, Diego Garcia. They've been putting masses of their nation's wealth in the ability to reach out and strike these down. See, in the past, we, the West, have won our wars because of our technology and our industry. That's how we defeated Russia in the Cold War. But China is different. China's technology, China's industry just happens to be better than ours. And they've done that over the last 20 years. And you look at all the Americans, you know, the Americans have consistently lost the war games that they play against China, the electronic computer-backed war games that they play against China to test their tactics. That's not me saying that. The deputy chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has come out and said it. The chief of operations of the US Navy has come out and said it. The Americans are looking for an answer and they don't have the answer at this stage. You know, so this is the problem we face. We can talk about anything we want, and half your people, I guess, at the national conference will be interested in whether or not I advise that I recommend that we should have national service. Well, that's fantastic. You're going to pay for that? When are you going to do it? You're going to take everyone? Have you got enough guns and boots for these people? You know, you've got to start with a strategy. If you don't have a strategy, going for a single solution to any of these problems is a total waste of time.
And Jim, that strategy, I would assume, has got to involve many of our institutions to build resilience. It's not just the military.
Correct.
It's the resilient institutions we need, like we pull together in bushfires and natural disasters and so on.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And there's only one organisation that can do this, and that's the government. The government has got to set up task forces across various areas to look at our industries, to look at our ports, to look at our shipping, to look at our water, to look at our stocks. You know, this is, we were surprised, Pat, by AdBlue. We didn't pick AdBlue. The brilliance of this government is that as soon as a problem comes up, they solve it. They do it magnificently. What I've been recommending for years is that we need an organisation within government that actually looks ahead and preempts things like AdBlue coming up. There will be 1,000 AdBlues out there, which if shipping stopped to this country, we would suddenly find that we can't do things. We can't feed our people without AdBlue because the diesel trucks don't run. I think, you know, and in this book that I'm working on with HarperCollins, the last chapter is what I recommend we should do. And of course, it starts with having a strategy, because once we've got a strategy, we know we can then carry the Australian people with us. Because suppose you were right, and suppose we have to double the defence budget. It's $44 billion per year at the moment. If it goes up to $88 billion per year, we've got to justify that. You can't justify it without a strategy.
Yeah. Jim, can I just shift to another thing for a moment? Do you see the Russian threat to you? How do you see the Russian threat to Ukraine? And how would you see such a threat or conflict impact on Australia?
I think this is the worst case scenario for powers that are aligned with the West, for the democracies, for the liberal democracies. This is the worst case. And this is why. Since the end of the Cold War, the American military, the American nation, has reduced the size and ability of the American nation has reduced what its armed forces can do by 30 to 50%. In 1991, at the end of the Cold War, the American military was capable, and states so in its national security strategy, which it's required to produce every 2 years, it stated in 1991 that it could fight and win 2 major wars, one in Europe, one in the Middle East, for example, and a minor war. maybe one in South America. Simultaneously, Pat, that's how we won the Cold, how we, the West, won the Cold War. And that's how all the other nations allied with the United States could afford not to spend much money on defence, because the Americans were spending a fortune, $750 billion in today's terms. $750 billion the Americans were spending on defence. Now, since then, they have not counting tanks or planes or ships or men, they now believe that they can fight one major war against China and hold in a second war. Now, that is, if you're even generous, that's a 30% reduction in military capability. I say it's 30 to 50% reduction in military capability. This is a fact, and yet it is not known in Australia. The Australian strategic thinkers didn't all of a sudden say, wow, the Americans have reduced their military capability. For the last 75 years, we Australians have depended on the American military for our prosperity, because we can trade, and for our security, because they fought all the major wars. But that didn't happen. No one said, wow, look at this, the Americans are just about disarming. We did nothing until this government came along. And this government has been extraordinary in putting the amount of money they've put in forming the alliances, in trying to get industry up. The question that your conference should address is, are we too late?
Well, Jim, I think when your book is released, we'll be very keen to have you back and talk about it and get through those key issues on building that national strategy. I think that's going to be extremely important, and to get a complete picture on just how you do it, because as you've said here, it's not just the military equipment, it's a whole of nation strategy like we apply when we deal with natural disasters. Correct. I think that's correct, isn't it?
That's absolutely correct. And as you alluded to before, a key part of that is society's attitude. Unless we start building up a view that Australia can be as strong in relative terms as Israel is. You know, so many people say to me, Pat, and I'm sure they've said it to you, oh, what can we do? What can we do? We're not strong enough. We're an extraordinarily strong nation. You know, we've got a GDP the size of Russia, and people should think about that. We have a GDP the size of Russia, and look at the Russian military. Look what the Russian military can do. The way they do it, of course, is by impoverishing their people. We don't want to do that, so we've got to do it in a different way. So that's what I say. But the only message I've got, Pat, the main message I've got is that the first thing we should do is come up with a strategy.
Well, Jim, when we get you on afterwards, when your book's done, I'd be very keen that this organisation slips in behind the work that's got to be done to get the awareness out there to build both the defences we need and the resilience we need in this country.
Thanks, Pat. And you cannot find a better government than the one that I'm proud to be a member of, to do exactly that and to lead that. And your organisation would be a great organisation to fall in behind. So thank you very, very much.
Okay, and thank you very much for the interview here today.
Thank you.